I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Danielle Park, editor of the popular blog Juggling Dynamite and president of Venable Park Investment Council, Incorporated. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, Jim.
What do we do with the robots taking over everybody's jobs? They estimate perhaps 40% of jobs could disappear to robots over the next 10 years.
You know, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I keep coming full circle to an idea. You know, our grandparents were farmers that lived on a plot of land where they produced most of their own goods. Well, anything they didn't produce and make themselves, they, bartered or exchanged with other people in their community. Ultimately, they didn't have much cash flow, but they had quite a bit of wealth and excellent standard of living. In the way of looking at that, they didn't have, they had mostly self-sufficient energy as well. They cut wood, cord wood from the farm, heat their house and all that good stuff. So as I look at this, I think to myself, okay, all the modern day concepts of greater productivity and efficiency from the workforce assumes two things. One, that you're still going to have enough customers who can afford to buy products. So therefore, these great efficiencies in introducing technology into businesses, that's great for profitability, but only if you've still got people to buy the stuff so you have revenue coming in. So there's a problem there. If we replace all the workers with robots, you're going to have a problem with customers. And the second thing is all this innovation, which is excellent, frees us up for doing other things. There's an assumption there that these other things that we can be doing are going to be net productive in the sense of advancing human health or, a standard of living. So the problem is at some point, this is all Maslow hierarchy basics, but you get through things like, okay, we no longer grow our food, we no longer cook our food. Most people don't know how to cook food, never mind grow it. They're buying their food off the big companies. Who are, putting it all together. Then you got to, if we're getting into an environment where we're going to automated transportation, so Uber is the first iteration of this, but Mercedes-Daimler has entered into an agreement with Uber to provide autonomous cars at some point for their service. So now we're talking about other studies that have looked at things like the trucking industry, which employs, millions of people in North America alone, and the estimates are that we could have a automated trucking sector within 2 or 3 years. The Tesla Motors cars that are coming out now, the latest version, are fully autonomous, not driver assisted, fully autonomous. So they have that capacity. We just don't have the legislation yet to approve that. So as we go along here, you say, great, so now we don't have to worry about food, production, or preparation. We don't have to worry about energy because that's all coming through the grid to us. We don't have to worry about transportation. That's all going to be autonomous. At some point, you've freed humans up so much that they have nothing productive left to do. So we sit around taking selfies and, watching shows on YouTube, and all that's great. Some people will no doubt use that free time to be, intellectual and dive down into problems in the world and come up with solutions. But the vast majority of people don't do that with their free time. So you start to realize that all this innovation has taken us full circle back to a place where people will not have as much cash flow. They will have nothing but time, so to speak, and then the incentives all have to flip to them figuring out how to be self-sufficient again. So instead of working somewhere to get money to go and buy products off all these companies, they're going to be back to my grandparents on the farm trying to just produce food, energy, everything on their own. So I think that's the world where we're headed to, and I think that the economic theories of today are very much missing that at some point efficiencies have hit the wall, and you can't make humans more efficient because there's nothing left for them to do, and then you've got the problem of no one available or able to purchase product. And certainly we ran the gambit on the debt thesis as well. So the conventional wisdom for many years has been when wages are flat or when you want consumers to spend more, just add more debt to the system. And of course we did that for 35 years. We've had this tripling in global debt since 1999. And again, you get to the point where people either are sickened off debt by their horrible personal experiences of it, either that or they can't borrow more because they don't have gains in their income to support further payments, and or you get to a rising rate environment, which eventually, of course, you have to. So all these things are kind of coming to this end point where we've hit a wall on these traditional thinking theories that have governed the world for the past 35 years. It's the same thing with the Bank of England, for example, speaking today. Mark Carney, our expat Canadian over there running the Bank of England, he comes out to his conference or his announcement date and his afterwards with the media, and everyone kind of yawns now when the central bankers come out because they're already at zero. They've already pulled all the rabbits out of the hats on QE. They're desperately trying to ease back out of that somehow, and they're trying to do it with a kind of a happy face on so no one thinks that they're panicked or worried, but we just want to slip out of this $4 trillion in assets that we've been absorbing off the banks over the past few years, as an example in the U.S. So again, I feel like we've hit the end of that narrative as well, that central banks can save us narrative, which has largely been in play since about 1998 when the long-term capital implosion happened and the U.S. Fed stepped in under Alan Greenspan to bail out the culprits who had taken on too much leverage and blown themselves up. So again, we've been doing, that's what I call a secular theme. We've been doing that since about 1998, as well. And again, we're at the end point there. So all focus now turns to what are we going to do to get growth going? If you listen to the Bank of Canada, they say, well, gee, the housing market's a mess, the households are over-indebted, our productivity gains are weak, we don't seem to be getting more out of our investment in labor or equipment these days. So, what do we hope? We hope, says the Bank of Canada, that we're going to see export growth in 2017 and that will carry Canada or keep the Canadian economy going forward. And now we've got the Trump administration and their very protectionist threats. And Canada is about in the top 3 countries to lose the most if they deliver on their, rewriting of NAFTA and a bunch of their border tax stuff. Canada is the one in the top 3 to lose. So I think we're in a very precarious position, and I think we've earned our way here, deservedly so, from many years now of bad policies and bad choices, and refusing to see the writing on the wall. Refusing to see these changes coming. Not just the demographics, which has been patently obvious, and you could track that if you were paying any attention, and what that meant for how we should be allocating resources. But that was all ignored. No one wanted to increase savings. No one wanted to acknowledge that the consumer spending bubble was finite because it was dependent on credit, which couldn't expand forever. And then all this automation, all this technology, it's all, wonderful stuff, but you have to figure on how do we offset the falling wages and the lack of workforce that you need for this new environment. And so it's interesting, I think it's going to be, there's a professor at UBC who did a study on this, and McLean's did an article on that. And the conclusion he comes up with is that you have to stop thinking about channeling people into the STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and math, and really try and focus on creation, subjective inputs, things that robots can't do, and he said it's interesting that, the exodus from things like Bachelor of Arts degree and these humanities and arts over the past few years may indeed now need to reverse, because all the very logical math-based stuff is the stuff that's most easily replicated and replaced by IA and technology. So I think, there's a lot of lessons in this, and that was an awful long answer to your question, but I think it's a fascinating study of how we evolve as a species. And I think the worst thing we can do is pretend we're not, pretend none of this is happening, stick your head in the sand and hope for the best. I think the best thing to do is focus on how to make the masses more efficient, so so they have less expenditures to make and can have a decent standard of living, without needing all the debt and all the expenditure and all the excess excess consumer goods. And I think that's partly behavior driven, and you're seeing that in people. They're moving away from sort of a revulsion against consumerism, the tiny house movement, the not wanting debt, wanting to be self-sufficient, wanting to go back to preparing your own food again, learning to cook, teaching your kids how to cook. I think those are the leading edge of the right trend here. And then again, trying to come up with creative ways to make a living, and to think outside the box, and to, not think that you can always do things in the same old way. An example that comes to mind is the fossil fuel workers that have, trained and specialized in fossil fuels. Well, be an energy expert, figure out ways to produce all kinds of energy, transition to the new green economy, and you're going to have a much better chance of staying employed than if you insist on this antiquated technology, which is obviously on its way out.
Well, even the big oil companies recognize that, with Shell buying up giant wind farms in Europe all over the place.
Yeah. What's interesting, when I was in California over Christmas, we did some touring of wind farms, and they're all privately owned in and around Palm Springs in that area, massive wind farms, and each section of it is owned by a different company. And indeed, some of the oil companies owned large sections of the wind farms. But the guide pointed out that the wind farms that were owned by, Suncor and those companies were all in terrible disrepair, because they almost bought them so they could say that they were a diversified energy company, but in fact they were not investing the time and effort to maintain and get efficient production out of those windmills. So you could see oil, for example, all falling down the back, spilling onto the ground at the base of these standards. The housing on the back of the motor was off on many of these windmills. It was just quite shocking to see how degraded and derelict they were relative to other companies which were maintaining them for maximum output right within the same eye shot. You could see these 2 sections or 3 sections and compare them. So I think there's been a lot of playing lip service by the big oil companies. The reality is their sunk costs are all, their chips are all heavily on fossil fuels. So they've been putting off and pretending that this transition isn't coming. And I think at some point they're going to have to admit that they made bad allocations of capital, like bad investments were made in doubling down in all these antiquated areas instead of literally R&Ding and building out the future. And, I think it's interesting I made mention of Daimler, but they said in their quarterly report today that they are doubling down on electric vehicles too. And so what that means is that they are not going to be able to pay out, because this new technology is very exciting, but it does require a lot of upfront investment in order to transition to the new technology. And it means they're going to have, less cash flow available for non-productive rents like share buybacks and dividends, which is what the investor class has been, dependent on over the past, let's say, decade for sure, where, valuations were obscene, and the only way that prices could keep going up on the equity side was if they kept paying out more cash flow and dividends to keep everyone ignoring the capital risk and being happy with the income. So he's saying, listen, we're going to double down. We're going to go head to head. We want to compete with Tesla for the electric car market. We see that there's a lot of opportunity in this area, but P.S. don't expect earnings growth and dividend growth to continue at the pace it's been.
We'll have more with Danielle Park right after the break.
GEM International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. GEM International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Danielle Park. Danielle, a UBC study found 1 in 8 Canadians who take prescription drugs between the ages of 54 and 64 are not taking them because they can't afford them. And they say in the long run that costs the healthcare system anywhere from $3 to $8 billion a year, because then they have to go to hospital. Canada is the only major country that has national health care that does not pay for prescription drugs or help you pay for them. Is this a false saving in the government's part?
Well, the first thing I think about when I read those studies is they must be commissioned by the drug companies, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who want to be on the funnel end of taxpayer dollars and funding into the healthcare system. And we know that the actual best way to avoid medication is to focus on your health, what you eat and what you do with your body in your spare time, right? So that is actually what Canadians should focus on. And I'm actually quite concerned if we were to move to a fully funded drug system. I think it puts the onus away from the lifestyle choices and behaviors that we need to reinstill back into the people, and puts more and more dependence upon drugs, and that means more profits for drug companies. I mean, look at what's going on in the U.S. right now with the system that they have, and one of the few things that the Trump administration has been saying that I agree with is that they need to renegotiate with the big drug companies, because many of those programs are funded by insurance. Many of drugs are funded by insurance programs in the U.S., and they never negotiate on cost, right? So the pricing, because there's such a huge pharma lobby that impacts and controls outcomes in governments, and that's who they're negotiating with for these massive contracts, you're seeing that they are not demanding efficient pricing, and you get escalating drug costs. So I think that's the wrong way to go. I think that we need to go back to a focus on preventing disease in the first place. When that means, and I was writing about this week, for example, there's this great new series on Netflix called Cooked, which I urge everyone to watch. It's based on Michael Pollan's book Cooked, but it looks at how we eat today relative to our ancestors and thousands of years of humanity, and why we're so sick, frankly, is because we've moved away from any food knowledge or how to make nutritious things to feed ourselves, and we rely on these big corporations to prepackage and provide, which is, of course, toxic for the human body in most cases. So this is why we're all so sick. So I get that there's certain cases of someone who develops some horrible disease, and drugs in that case are essential to treat aspects of that disease. So I'm not trying to say that there's no one that legitimately needs drugs, and that I can understand there's funding issues there. But in general, something like 80% of the illness that we are currently suffering from is avoidable through lifestyle choices and changes. And we really do need to shift the tax system and the taxpayer funding away from, the treating the disease after the fact, and move it to preventative things. We, for example, must tax junk food and make other foods more competitive and affordable, rather than, making the cheap stuff what everyone can afford. We need to treat it like a drug, because the sugar, salt, and fat that is infiltrating the food system through these processed foods is actually addictive. And we do have rules around other addictive substances like alcohol and cigarettes. We tax them heavily. We control, what age you have to be before you can ingest them. We have rules about where and how that can be done. Those are public interest policies, and they are reflective of the fact that we do have a taxpayer-funded health system in Canada, and we all do have an interest. If everyone's health goes down the drain, our system literally can't support it, no matter how much we fund it. So, we really do have to be I get the emotional impulse, wouldn't it be lovely to help everyone that's sick? But ultimately, if individuals don't take personal responsibility for their health choices, there's no system that can sustain that or afford to pay the drugs and the treatments that's going to require. And mostly I'm concerned about the kids. Because again, if we were giving them drugs and alcohol and cigarettes, it would be considered outrageous. It would be considered, poor parenting. And yet we've got a whole generation of children that are having their health corrupted through diabetes, early onset disease, because of what we're allowing them to ingest, and the marketing machine that's allowed to hammer them. Again, if we were advertising cigarettes to kids, the world would be in an uproar, right? We wouldn't allow it, but we allow this poisonous food to be marketed to our children. So those are obvious places where we should start if we're serious about trying to revamp and make a more efficient health system.
Only Quebec has laws concerning the advertising of junk food to children. Last night on the national news, they're saying small children's popular websites expose them to 25,000 fast food ads a year.
Yeah, that is right out. We have to stop this crazy, destructive trend of allowing corporations to control and feed us every bit of junk that is profitable for them at the expense of everything, that matters. This goes back to, where are we trying to get in this life? What does it mean to have efficiency? What does living standards mean if you've got a hollowed out population with horrific health, IOUs in the till, no actual function to them other than to be mindless consumers of media and crappy food, and thereby to support industries like pharma and healthcare, because we're just these hapless victims of it. I mean, this is not how you make a productive society.
Municipalities can play a role in this. Most cities ban you from having a garden in your front yard. I just saw a story where a woman was growing potatoes and other homegrown goods in her front yard, and the city shut her down. And she was having school tours come there to show children where food comes from and how to make it yourself, because what went into the soil, the fact that you didn't use pesticides, herbicides, and so on. And they shut her down. She had to put in just a regular lawn like everybody else.
Well, that's ridiculous, right? So our idea of what is attractive or aesthetically pleasing evolves throughout humanity all the time, right? We no longer, put, lead on our faces to make our skin white anymore either. So, obviously we are capable of evolving. We always have, and we have to change these antiquated concepts, And again, as I say, I have hope because this was in my lifetime. My grandparents and your grandparents knew these things and had a more sustainable system. And in the modern times, the modern ways, so to speak, came in and changed everybody to this much different model where corporations get all the benefit and we get all the bills. So this has to reverse. And, I think one of the good things about the change in government in the United States, and, someone was saying the problem with Mr. Trump is that he's so, uncouth in the way he presents his comments and his discussions with other world leaders, and he had, some big kerfuffle on the phone today with the Prime Minister of Australia, and he hung up on him and all this. And I think to myself, what? Better that we have the obvious out in the open now, because what I think is happening is under past administrations, under more civil appearance, people maybe thought things were going okay or everything was nice or that problems were not there. But in this administration, I think it's shocking people into awareness that things are not going well, that that this is not going in the direction of sustainable health or the environment, even the economy can't sustain itself in the way that it's going. And so I think that maybe this is a wake-up call. And so far, I think that is happening. I think that you're seeing a lot more mobilization on the ground of people, for example, who are concerned about changing some of these policies and trends. And environmental stuff. People are coming forward and saying, no, we're not going to have this. We're going to focus on what we can do on a community level, on a municipal level, on a state level. And you're seeing that already. There's, stories about different governments, municipalities that are introducing, because of their concern about the national trend and what's happening, they're accelerating their efforts and initiatives to bring in clean energy, for example, or water protection laws and this sort of thing. So I think, in some ways, I think he may be the catalyst to bring all this stuff out into the public awareness and incite them to care more and take more actions themselves.
Danielle, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you.
My guest has been Danielle Park. Check out her website, jugglingdynamite.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com Radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com Radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com Radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.